Now, you grew up in the Muskoka area of Ontario.
Yeah, I did. So quite a distance from where I've been doing my research. Yeah.
So how do you get from Muskoka to the land of the Inuit?
It was a bit of a journey, and I think if you're not born in Nunavut or the Northwest Territories, you have to journey there. And for me, it was through Parks Canada that I ended up experiencing the Arctic. And my first experience was in the Western Arctic. I lived in Inuvik, and I worked on the North Slope of the Yukon in a national park called Inuvik National Park. And that took hold of me. I worked in a few other places after that, but I always felt this draw to go back, and I was lucky enough to obtain a job in a Iqaluit in 2000, and I worked there for quite a while before going back to university.
But why polar bears?
Yeah, because they're very interesting, but as well in national parks there are challenges with keeping people safe from polar bears. And while I was working, we did a number of public safety related projects to study how best to keep people safe from bears and bears safe from park visitors. And that led me to have interest in polar bears, and I just sort of went from there, and connections with my fantastic supervisor, Andy DeRoche, during that time when I was working with parks, and just one thing led to another, and I found myself beginning a PhD program.
So you're studying polar bears now in the Fox Basin area.
Yes.
And that's one of the most difficult places to work in the entire Arctic, is it not?
Well, it has that reputation because oddly enough, it's not in the high Arctic. It's a mid-latitude area, and it's the last subpopulation of polar bears in Canada to have the baseline inventory research done. And it did have a reputation of bad weather, lots of storms. It's very windy, especially on the Quebec side of the basin, so on the mainland side, and storms and so on. So it was always a challenge, I think, for people to get out to do the work. And there were some preliminary studies done, but it was always, for some reasons, way before me, the entire population had never been studied. So we were doing baseline work, and I was lucky enough to be able to work with the polar bear biologist from Nunavut, Lily Peacock, and it's been fascinating because we started from scratch and built the study from the ground up.
Now, how do you use traditional ecological knowledge in your studies? What role does it play?
Yeah. Well, for me, because I was responsible for the polar bear movement and the sea ice habitat components of the work, interviewing people about their knowledge about those topics, and gathering as much information about bear movements, distribution in different seasons, and the kinds of ice that bears prefer to use is very important for me in interpreting the information that I've collected using satellite collars that we put on bears, and also using a lot of satellite imagery to interpret what kind of sea ice habitat is present. It is a way of sort of ground truthing your information, because as it occurs with many students and scientists, you can't be there all the time. You go up, and I go up to help with surveys, aerial surveys, and deploy the collars and so on. But then I would go back to Edmonton, to the university, and continue working on courses and obtaining the data that was coming in. So I'm not on the ground with where the bears live, and people in communities are on the ground with the bears all the time. So they provide a lot of insight into those times when I can't be there, and also the duration of their information is far longer than mine. I lived in Nunavut for 5 years before I went back to university, but people live their whole lives, and then their families lived there before them. So a large accumulation of information about bears and their movements and habitat.
Now, I've been on 3 or 4 polar bear surveys and capture programs.
Yes.
Each time I come back thoroughly intimidated. Do you not find it intimidating when you go out there, where you're essentially your safety lines are far away, very long?
Only on my first time in the field, because working on the bears, because I had worked on grizzly bears before, and they are, the bears that I worked on were on the Yukon North Slope, and they're relatively small bears. And the first time I went out with Andy and the Beaufort to get some training and learn what I was going to do the next year when we were capturing bears in Fox Basin. Yes, it was, because they were large, and I wasn't quite sure how to, move around them and how to handle them. We have to move them a lot when you're collaring them and taking all the samples and measurements and so on, and pulling teeth, and it was a bit unnerving. And then, when you're learning a new skill, like riding a bike or riding a horse, you become accustomed to what you need to do and what is best for yourself and the bears, and that went away. I mean, you do need to be careful, of course, because they are large bears. But as well, when you're working with a team of people, you're relying on each other to do things right and do things the best way, and to help keep each other safe. So you really do form a cohesive team when you're out in the field, and you just you can kind of read each other's minds, and just looking at the bear after a while, after processing a number of bears, you can tell what state they're in, more or less. So eventually, it's kind of routine almost, although every bear is different at the same time. And when we were doing the Fox Basin work, we worked the entire Fox Basin, so we would start in Hudson Strait and work all the way around to Gulick and Southampton and around. So we'd be working together for a couple of months altogether. So
after out of the base camp, or do you go back to a community?
We moved along, and we would work out of communities when it works sort of logistically with fuel caches and so on. And we also had some field camps, some cabins that were out on the land, hunters and trappers cabins, and other cabins that other researchers had used. So it really depended. So we were a little team in the helicopter that was our office and all our gear, and we just sort of move along. It was a fantastic experience, and very informing, because when you have the opportunity to see so many bears over a long time and discuss their behavior and the state of their their body condition and so on, it really helps you be a better interpreter of your data.
Let me ask you the silly journalist question: what's the biggest bear that you've seen?
Oh wow, yeah. I'm really bad at estimating weights, but one of the bears that we handled looked me in the face, when he was kind of moving around later. So they're very large. Yeah, and very difficult to move around sometimes. We were mostly capturing females, because those are the bears that we collar. But if there were males or other bears in the vicinity, we would capture them as well and immobilize them so that they wouldn't bother the bear that was immobilized, and hope that they would come to sort of at the same time. So we were immobilizing some males as well, and they were enormous. Their paws are, larger than my head. Yeah, there's something else.
Now, I know this is collecting a lot of baseline work, but do you get the sense that the Fox Basin population is in pretty good shape?
Yeah, because, at the same time, we were flying an aerial survey while we were doing the capture work, so, and the estimates have come out, I think, last year, and it's about the same as the previous estimate, is around 2,400 bears, 2,500 bears, and this population is mid-latitude, so there is still sea ice. They don't have to come off the ice for too long every year, and a lot of the bears look in pretty good condition, particularly in Fox Basin proper. We did see bears of sort of lower body condition on southern Southampton Island, so on the Hudson Bay side. So we were, and some of the movement data might suggest that they have a more difficult time having to come off the ice earlier, go on the ice later, and just not having as much time to catch seals and get fat.
How far into it are you now with your PhD?
Yeah, at the end. It's wonderful. Yeah, there's a few months still, but
And where do you
I'll
go?
be out the door this year.
Where will you go after that?
Yeah, my great desire is to return to the Arctic and work there. So I guess.
Would it be with Parks Canada?
It depends. A lot of agencies are slimming down right now, so we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Well, let me ask you one last question. You've touched on the theme a number of times, but what is it that keeps drawing you back? A young woman from Ontario.
Ontario, the northern hardwood forest,
Yeah.
all those maple trees and things. I love the landscape. I love the openness. And I love to be able to go out and really be out far away from, the rest of the world. And I guess the land is fascinating. Everything is smaller, but the full ecosystems are there, and it's just very beautiful. You've been to the Eastern Arctic?
Yes.
Yeah, so you've been to Baffin and Ellesmere, so it's very rugged. I love mountains, and I love skiing, and I like snow. Longer ski seasons are better. All of those things. Hunting's great, fishing's great.
Good. Well, thanks for dropping by. And if anybody wants to see Vicki, her poster session is over there, and I think you might be there for a little while longer.
Yeah, until 7.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you
Thanks,
very
Ed.
much.